Hi, I'm Phil Craig.
And I'm Andrew Lownie.
And together we aim to bring you the most scandalous stories and some of the most scandalous people in history. So thanks for joining us here on the Scandalmongers podcast. I have a question. Are you feeling scandalous? Because we are. And we are, in fact, the Scandalmongers. And welcome to our podcast. My name is Phil Craig. And I have with me a fellow scandalmonger.
And my name is Andrew Lownie.
And what are we, Andrew? We're old mates.
We are. I think a friendship that goes back almost 40 years, perhaps more.
I think
to teenagers.
I think actually between us, we've had 80 years in the business of telling stories.
We have, in different mediums. Publishing.
Television.
And now podcasts.
So, I don't know if anybody listening to this podcast will remember the summer of 1978. Punk rock was in the charts. Saturday Night Fever was in the movies. And where were you and I, Andrew? Can you remember?
We were on a bus going around Europe listening to the Beach Boys.
We were 18. Oh, I'm sorry, I was 18. You were about 8.
I was, yes, a lot younger than you.
I do have some rather scandalous pictures of that experience, which I might leak onto Twitter at some point. Yes, we were both winners of an essay contest showing some early literary promise.
Extraordinary. 50 of us went round Europe on a bus, 5-star hotels, paid for by Barclays Bank.
Thank you, Barclays.
And it began this great friendship.
And actually, sponsorship opportunities for Barclays Bank are available on this podcast.
Yes, indeed.
Or anybody, frankly. Kebab shops.
Anything. Well, we'll see. Who wants to be associated with scandal?
Bet365.
Odd things.
So we met in 78, and then we both ended up at university, where I directed you for the very first time.
Exactly, in a play, wearing shorts.
And these pictures are scandalous, and I think we definitely have to put them on Twitter. Andrew played a schoolboy covered in spots, being abused and shouted at and bullied. Most about me, the director.
Story of my life.
And then we've kept in touch ever since, really. Andrew's written many books, been a very important literary agent. I have been a bit of a hack in the world of television, but I've tried to be serious now and again as well. And I've also written 4 books, and I'm working on my 5th. And I think the reason why we've got together for this podcast, if I may speak for us both, is that over the years, our stories have often overlapped.
I think we're interested in the same sort of things, and we're interested in the hidden part of history that often is curated out or not part of the narrative. And I think also we're both prepared to push to find out more about these stories rather than to take the accepted view. That's
a very good way of putting it. And actually quite a lot of the work we have done has crossed over the same subjects. World War II, the Kincora Boys' Home scandal, the royal family, Mountbatten. Spies.
Yeah, and I think we both use the same sort. We're both trained historians. We both use documents. You're very skilled as an interviewer. And I think we feel that we can go that bit stage further than a lot of historians in telling the story and the real story.
Well, actually, I think I noticed a bit of a spring in your step this morning, if I may say, Andrew. It is the 16th of October. The government is about to fall, but it's something also rather important happened in a story that you've been pursuing for many years.
Yes, I mean, one of the books I wrote about was about Lord Mountbatten, and I revealed the existence of 2 boys who claimed to have been abused by him in 1977. And this morning, another victim has emerged. There have been front-page stories in the newspapers about it, a very credible witness, and this, of course, backs up my research. So I think that's certainly one of the shows that we might look at in the future.
I mean, for those who don't know, Andrew has been running an amazing campaign, at some personal and financial cost, I should say, to get access to papers that have been closed off to him and to indeed anybody on the Mountbatten saga.
Yeah, it's what I call the Mountbatten diary scandal. And these were the private diaries and letters of Edwina and Dickie Mountbatten, the last Viceroy and Viceroy of India. They were sold freely by the family, bought by the University of Southampton with public monies and under the acceptance of Lou scheme for £2.5 million, and then closed. And historians haven't been able to look at them for the last 10 years. And I, through the Information Commissioner, got a decision they should be released. They then challenged that decision, and we've now had to go through the courts. But the result is that 30,000 pages of their diaries have now been released, 99%. But as you say, at a huge financial cost. That's maybe why I'm doing the podcast.
Well, I'll buy the coffees next time. Oh, no, actually, anybody who cares about this, and I think actually many of you should, can find a way of helping Andrew meet some of the huge costs he's taken on board. I'm sure he'd appreciate it. Apart from that scandal, of course, our work has touched on all sorts of areas where we've had shared interests. Funnily enough, I did an awful lot of work on a biography of Diana, which is something else we're going to be looking at. My book actually was judged to be not scandalous enough. And I was famously, my newspaper serialization deal was withdrawn from me. It was taken from my grasp because it was seen as being too fair and too balanced and too kind. I'm slightly
well, I hope
proud
you've
of
learnt
that.
your lesson now.
Well, I think I learned a lot about how the business of newspapers and publishing affected the way that all of us learned the Diana story. That's something I'd really love to talk about when we come to do that show.
But I think what's also fascinating is that all these stories we think we know, we don't really know. And there's always something new to say, always new material, always new people to talk to, and always a new, we're still discovering new things about the Second World War. And I think that's one of the fascinating things. And particularly things like the royal family have had, in some ways, there's been so much deference to them that the real story hasn't really emerged. And that's, I hope, what we're going to be trying to do in the podcast, to tell behind the scenes the real story of what happened, drawing on our training as investigative journalists, in fact, as well as historians.
Well, that's absolutely right. And actually, I think I was thinking about it this morning on the way here on the tube. We're sort of living in a new age of scandals at the moment, and scandals are really affecting the way we live month by month. The scandal of the Downing Street parties was one of the reasons we lost a prime minister. The scandal of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party was a reason we lost a leader of the opposition. Look what happened at the White House, at the riots. The BBC has been shaken by repeated scandals. Jimmy Savile and Bashir.
I think have always been there. I think it just, as you say, needs something to make people suddenly look at them in a new light, new evidence, or suddenly a change of stance by the authorities. I suppose we're learning more about these scandals because people are now more prepared to talk. There are whistleblowers coming forward, documents are being released. And so there are a lot of stories that we thought we knew, as I say, but actually there are many more new things to say. It's
funny because if you look at what happened with Jimmy Savile and Martin Bashir, for years and years, people in our business gossiped about this stuff. And there were rumours. And some things were printed, but there was never anything really concrete. And then suddenly there's a moment of change. In the case of Bashir, somebody finally, a very, very good digging journalist, found real paper evidence of the cover-up, which blew the scandal apart. And I sort of have to say, I wonder, with all your work on Mountbatten, the rumours, the small amount that's been printed, perhaps there will become a moment. Maybe this story today is part of that.
I hope that is the moment where things change. Things have to change because we can't go on the way we are. Let us hope that people realise that to have trust and transparency in our institutions, they have to be open, and we have to be able to know our history.
We talk a lot about the establishment, and I have to say, when I first met you all those years ago, you were definitely the poshest person I'd ever met. With my sheltered upbringing in the north,
that's why I called you Philip.
That's why you call me Philip. Only you and my mother ever called me Philip. It's funny because I think you're the son of a judge, the grandson of a general, and I think you're a Tory, and I think you're a monarchist, and yet you're probably the most rebellious person against the establishment I've ever met.
Yeah, well, that's good. I like to be independent and make my own mind up.
But is that the result of the frustration of trying to find out the truth?
Yeah, I think I'm primarily a historian. I want to find out the truth. I'm used to dealing with documents. And I feel very bolshy if I'm not allowed to do my research because other people want to paint a different narrative. So, and I've always been interested in history, and what humanizes history in some ways are the personalities and the way they behave and the things that they do wrong. And all my books, I suppose, have a theme of the establishment cover-up, which is often worse than the initial crime.
Oh, yeah.
So, this in some ways, this is why these series of chats we're going to have, I think, interest me so much, but I think are also so important because it's a really good way into history.
Well, I think we hope to do a whole programme on the Martin Bashir story, which is something I know an awful lot about. I know many of the main players.
I think we're also hoping that people may have suggestions of things they want to have investigated
absolutely.
That we can look at.
I'd love to hear that. But when I think of the BBC and the cover-up of what Bashir did, it's a different kind of establishment. It's not posh people in grey suits.
No, I think this is the interesting thing. What is in some ways this deep state? Are they people who just want to maintain the status quo for their own advancement? Who are the people who make these decisions? And this is the problem I find time and time again, They're always anonymous. There's always something called the Knowledge and Management Department. But nothing is signed. There's never a number you can call. And it is feel rather sinister. It's almost as if we're living in East Germany.
Well, I know some of the people who got hurt by the Bashir story, the ones who are described as the malcontents. And they spent nearly 30 years wondering if, indeed, the powers that be were out to get them or whether they were being paranoid. And guess what? It turns out the powers that be were out to get them at the very highest level. And it's so weird because that sort of establishment was really a mixture of the sort of posh people that run the BBC, but also a slightly rougher crowd, the sort of leather jacket crowd who got their foot in the door. And they quite liked the idea that the BBC could have people like that inside.
Well, it's about power, and I think what we're trying to do in the programme is speak truth to power. That here you will feel that we are prepared to ask the tough questions, and to say things that people might not want to hear.
Well, that's right. I do think that the real scandal, actually, of what happened, certainly at the BBC, was a reluctance to accept that they'd been wrong, and actually a lack of curiosity about how the sausage was made. I spent a bit of time with Steve Hewlett, the editor of Panorama, whose career was really made by that programme. And he was a lovely man, and he was much mourned when he died a few years before the scandal broke. But I think he always knew that he hadn't asked the really hard questions of what Bashir was doing. And a good editor, they always tell you this at training courses, a good editor is the story's friend and enemy. You have to ask the really hard questions before you put it to air.
And I'm sure you'll be asking me some tough questions about some of my things. But also, do you think things have changed? That in some ways people were prepared to put their hand up and apologise and to say they got things wrong. But now everyone just ploughs on regardless because they don't care about things. That they think they can get away with it.
I think people do take sides about things perhaps a little bit more. They dig into their ideological trenches. They don't want to give any grounds to their enemies and meet them halfway. Perhaps social media is part of that. Yes, I do think so. And I think it's a slightly more aggressive culture that we're dealing with when we're, as journalists and historians, that people won't look at you necessarily as an objective truth seeker, which is what we'd all like to be, but as part of some side. And, we can't talk to them because they're allied with so-and-so. I don't like them because look who their friends are. Look what they liked on Facebook.
We have no side. We just want to get to the heart of the story.
We do not. And actually, that was certainly my experience of the BBC, which was overwhelmingly positive, I have to say, when I worked there on Panorama and other shows. And indeed, other places I've worked, is that most people in our industry do still want to do just that. They want to find things out. They want to unearth uncomfortable truths and get the story straight. But I think what you've found is that people are less keen to let you sort of analyse the full weight of evidence so that you can capture, in your case, the man in full, warts and all.
Well, I think one of the problems is work in publishing. I think books have that power, like television, to change people's minds and open their minds to other points of view. But I think the problem is that, the costs of doing this, the risks of libel, put people off. And powerful people are able to use the courts and other means to suppress this stuff coming out. And, it's cheaper to do a diet book than to tell, the truth about something. And I think that's why, podcasts like ours are going to be very important, because this is one of the ways that these stories will be told.
Did you feel that you had the support of your peers when your campaign to find out the truth got difficult for you and people started whispering about you?
Well, people privately, are very supportive, but no one wants to go public. They don't want to jeopardize their own advancement. They clearly have their own contacts which could be jeopardized by this. And so it's easy to let someone else, in instance, do the heavy lifting. But, we all have to work together because only by cooperating are we able to actually produce the stories we want.
I mean, you go to literary festivals and you speak at literary gatherings and dinners and the like. Has that dropped off at all since you became a sort of high-profile critic of I guess the royal and the government refusal to let you have access to papers?
No, not absolutely opposite. People come up to at the end of these talks and say, good on you, and we support you, and we wish more people did this. And there is a belief that we aren't getting the full picture, and there, in some ways, there are two competing narratives here: the one that's curated by the so-called establishment, and the reality. So no, I mean, it tends to be other historians who just want a quiet life, But I think people are generally very supportive, and I hope that will be the case, that, with our series of talks, people will feel that we're making some sort of contribution, as well as being fun and I hope opening their eyes to all sorts of new stories.
Yes, and all sorts of silly photographs from the 1980s. There was plenty of those. Well, I think that's probably enough to give people a sense of what we're about. I'm really looking forward to this. I'm particularly looking forward to all the ones on World War II, so I can dig into some of the work I've done on that. And of course, the royal stories that we're going to do, and maybe even sneak in a bit of Emma Hamilton.
Yes, we can go about that
A little
far.
bit of
There's
18th
still
century
stories
scandal.
Well,
Scandals drive the world. They make change.
I mean,
I do believe that.
the extraordinary stuff thing is that there's still files on Queen Victoria which are
They're not.
held back
Why?
to do with her daughter and possibly secret pregnancies, and
Goodness me.
all this stuff is there to be found and to be discussed. So there's a whole new world of adventure coming up.
There is. Well, unless we're dragged off to the tower between now and then, I shall look forward to exploring that world with you, Andrew.
Me too.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Scandalmongers podcast. This has been a Podcast World production. You can get in contact with our show by emailing team@podcastworld.org, placing Scandalmongers in the heading, or via our social media links within the show's bio.